Welcome to the Rise to Thrive podcast. Rise to Thrive is your real talk resource to elevate your life and business through growth, wellness, and manifestation. With your co-host, Linda Tate, financial advisor turned life and wealth strategist, founder of Leela Life, and self-named Nordic shaman, and Amelia Travis, yoga teacher turned multi-six-figure business coach, founder of Stoked Yogi, and spiritual warrior. We're here to help you level up and create the life you imagine, sharing inspiration and strategy to elevate vibes and consciousness so you can rise to your best self and thrive as your best self. Tune in weekly to Thrive Daily. Tuning in now. It's 2019 and your investments can be in alignment with the world you are creating. Change Finance is not your normal Wall Street company. They are woman-owned and offer investments that change the world. Go to change-finance.net/MBTY to learn more and start investing today. Change Finance is a registered investment advisor. This is not an offer to buy or sell any product.
Weed, pot, Mary Jane, marijuana,
smoking the reefer,
trees,
Puff Daddy,
green magic. That's not a thing.
Magic Dragon.
I think the magic dragon might be something else. In case you didn't catch it, we're talking about cannabis. It is a hot topic in the United States today as the Green Revolution sweeps across our country.
Across America.
Documentary. You guys, we're going to talk about weed. Do you smoke it? Do you like it? What are its therapeutic benefits? What are the effects of criminalizing it? And what are the effects of decriminalizing it?
Do you have your medical marijuana card?
Or do you even need one? If you're living in California, Colorado, or a handful of other states, you can just walk into a store and buy yourself some marijuana. Marijuana is everywhere. Where were you brought up?
Pot's bad for you.
Well, that's what we're going to talk about. So welcome back to a fun episode of Rise to Thrive, where we talk about getting high and whether it's good or not.
Or bad.
All right, Linda, I want to kick this off. Sorry, Mama Lynn Tate, but we're going to go there. With your first experience of marijuana, what happened? Where were you? Do you remember it? Tell me everything.
Well, you see here, I was in high school. There was a guy in my class, and we were in a car, and there was another person in the car. So maybe it was like 3 or 4 people total. And we were hanging out, and it was super like, I have a joint. And then like we passed it. And I think that was the first time I had ever smoked. And I was like, oh, like I just smoked pot. Like it kind of wasn't a big deal. And I didn't feel high. And that's what happened.
You know, that is so crazy to me. Like, so listeners, if you guys have ever used cannabis, if you've ever tried smoking weed, a lot of people say that the first time that they try marijuana, they don't get high.
Because
like,
you're not
all about.
You're not like
you don't inhale.
Yeah, didn't know how to smoke anything really, and I just like breathed in, like it was probably in my mouth, and I exhaled, and I was like, oh, that's all, like that's what it is. And
Okay. So when was the first time that you like coughed your face off and got like lit?
I couldn't tell you.
Like the second time I smoked, it was 2 hours later.
No, I mean, it was somewhere, but I think maybe for a few couple of times that I had tried it might have been drinking, and I was just like, I don't get what the big deal's all about. And it was like, yeah, well, you've drank maybe a bit too much, and now you feel, what do they call it? Crossfaded.
Oh man, that's the worst.
Yeah. So, but I would say it wasn't until much later in my life, like within the past few years, that I could start experimenting and understanding like what I would call the equivalent of my glass of wine.
Yeah. Or perhaps even the therapeutic benefits of marijuana that we'll get to.
I would love to touch
shortly.
on.
Cool. All right. So do you want to know about my first time? I can't actually remember, you guys. But I will say this. I grew up in a household where cannabis or marijuana was not something that my parents did openly, but it was definitely something that they occasionally did after my sister and I were asleep. And I remember being really young, like 5 or 6, and my parents were hanging out with some of their friends at our family beach house, some of their old, Air Force and Army friends. And I remember coming out when I was supposed to be in bed, and they were like, smoking a J of like, something. And it was this distinctive kind of sweet smell. And I remember like walking over to my dad and like sniffing, like being like, and I was probably like 5 or 6. And they were like, no, Mila, like, don't do that. My family calls me Mila. And I was just like, what are you guys doing? Like, this looks like fun.
That's how you talk when you're 5.
Yeah. But I just remember like having this impression, I guess you would say a favorable impression of like that smell, like that association being like, you're on vacation and you're with your friends and there's like nice conversation. And it was just always something nice. So it was never really like villainized in my upbringing. But the first time I remember 2 different times of trying to try weed myself. One was going into my dad's closet and stealing some of his very, very old, very seedy, like Mexican swag, like brick weed, like terrible. I mean, we're talking like hundreds of seeds in this bag of like brown shake. And I remember taking it and taking his bong, which I didn't know what it was, but I figured that it was like the apparatus for figuring out how to smoke this thing. The only thing is I didn't know you were supposed to put water in it. So I like invited my friends over into the garage. I think I was around 13. And we tried really hard to get stoned, but it did not work. And then I ended up getting in big trouble because I don't know, I think my dad figured out that I had like taken his stuff and used it. So that didn't work either. But the first time that I actually recall really experiencing the effects of cannabis, I was probably around 14, yeah, just shy of 15. And I remember going to this kid's house and he was like, it was just him and his dad was at work, and he kind of was like he was like the weed dealer, you know what I mean? He had like big weed pictures all over his walls, and he was a young guy like me. He was like 16. And we smoked a joint in his room with a bunch of friends. And it was one of those peer pressure situations where everybody was like, I had said, well, the last time I tried this, it didn't work. And they were like, well, then more, like do more, take one more hit. And I just remember like taking a hit and they were like, inhale it. Okay, now hold it in. And I did. And then that experience of like coughing so hard, I thought I was going to die. And then just being immediately like, real high. And like going into like a 2 to 3 hour giggle fit with like 2 of my girlfriends that were with me, and kind of carousing through the neighborhoods like it was probably 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And I just remember like it was a lot of fun, and it also felt dangerous, risky, like we're gonna get in trouble. And that was the beginning of a long, mostly sometimes healthy relationship with cannabis. It's definitely varied over the years.
It's interesting too, because right now you feel this transition of like the popular stigma. And so I think there's this underlying, whether it's like shame or dangerous or, literally people going to jail for decades for pot.
And not just people. I mean, we would be totally remiss if we didn't emphasize how this has affected people of color and how it has been weaponized really against people of color and people in poverty to imprison them, where there's a huge disparity between people of color and white people who've been imprisoned because of weed. And it's not cool.
No, there's a new documentary called Grass is Greener. Have you heard of this?
I've heard of it. I haven't seen it.
Yeah. I mean, it goes into like the history of jazz and the music industry, and showing how jazz artists were in cannabis, and then showing some of like the suppression because of the racism through jazz and the control that started showing. It's interesting. I didn't see it yet. I
mean, the history of marijuana, the history of cannabis as a plant, hemp as a plant, and its criminalization over time, it's definitely, I mean, if you guys don't already know that how we determine what are Schedule 1, 2, you know, what are restricted substances in our country and what are not, if you don't already know that it's totally corrupt and based on primarily like, you know, money, then like, welcome to your wake up call. Like the plant of cannabis and hemp, it's called weed because it's a weed. It literally, like, you can just throw some seeds into your yard and like water and sunlight and you'll grow these big, beautiful plants that have so many medicinal properties. I mean, we have an endocannabinoid system. We have endocannabinoid receptors in our brain, and our natural ability of forgetting, and I'm getting ahead of myself here, but that is the process of our cannabinoid receptors. So I am a huge advocate for legalization, decriminalization, for free usage of marijuana. I think it's I'm comfortable saying I think it's less risky than alcohol. At the very least, I think we can draw the parallel and say, like, if, you know, alcohol has been legal for over 100 years since the prohibition, like, let's get on the freaking train and nationally decriminalize or legalize.
It's so crazy to me.
Right? Like,
crazy.
And I mean, I think what we're seeing now with this green revolution is the beginning of like, I don't know, there's conflict over that as well, because when we decriminalize and legalize and then we give the states, you know, control over taxing and regulating, there's a lot of things that follow that, and production practices that follow that, that may, you know, not necessarily keep the weed or the process of farming it, distributing it, and consuming it pure, you know, like there's definitely negative stuff that can come out of that. Yeah. It's not
seeing it become this pesticide, you know, Philip Morris diving into the green rush, going.
So what do you think are the benefit? And now let's talk first about psychoactive. Well, before we even do that, we got to explain to people, what are the two primary compounds in marijuana that make it have effects on our body? We talk about THC,
CBD.
Okay, so if you don't know, I'm gonna pull up a little. So THC is the psychoactive component that makes you feel high, right? And THC is the fun part, you guys.
And I think CBD is really the fun part.
CBD is fun too. They're both fun.
Unofficial sponsor, Recess.
So the interesting thing about, so I said we have endocannabinoid receptors in our body. If you didn't already know, CBD and THC have the same chemical makeup: 21 carbon atoms, 30 hydrogen atoms, and 2 oxygen atoms. Yes, I'm reading that. No, I didn't have it memorized. But it's the structure and the formation of the compounds is actually the arrangement of a single atom that makes them different. So if you think about cannabinoid receptors and these cannabinoid compounds as being a lock and key, they're just a slightly different shaped key, right? So just like you can have two things that look like a key, but one of them unlocks the lock and the other one doesn't, kind of the same principle. It's a microscopic difference. So there are actually 85 cannabinoids in cannabis, but the two that people are always talking about are THC and CBD. And we're going to put this in layman's terms, but basically THC is what gets you high. CBD is more of the body high, pain relief, anxiety relief. It's more of like the feel good and less of the psychoactive or head high.
Well, and the endocannabinoid system is part of our nervous system.
Yes. So the thing that I think is really cool about that, and I'm not a scientist, so you guys just take this with a big old grain of salt, but basically we have endocannabinoid receptors in our brain. So we have locks that are designed for the keys like CBD and THC, but we actually have our own natural production of endocannabinoids, and those are particularly active when we are experiencing pain, whether that pain is emotional, mental, or physical. So the reason that we forget, our actual ability to forget, and especially our ability to forget painful experiences, is because of our endocannabinoid receptors. It's because of our natural cannabinoid system in the body. So think about for a minute the most painful thing that you've ever experienced. And you can probably remember the experience because you remember everything that was around it. You remember what led up to it, and you remember what happened after, and you remember, the consequences. But when you try to go into memory of the actual pain at its intensity, like I'm thinking right now, you guys, about when I was delivering my son. I had an unmedicated birth, and when I was experiencing what they call the ring of fire, like he was actually crowning, I can't remember the real pain. Like I can't remember. And part of that was endorphins, and part of that was adrenaline, but a huge part of it is our cannabinoid system. So it's what helps us forget. And I believe if we didn't have that ability to forget, like, I don't think we would be able to keep moving forward in life, because we'd be like, pain has been there before. It's going to be there again. It's really bad. Like, let's just not move a single, inch in any direction. So CBD and THC, there's these two different things. THC is what's classified as an illegal substance in most countries around the world, including the United States. CBD is now kind of in the gray area because of its close relationship with THC. Under the Farm Bill of 2014 in the United States, CBD derived from hemp is federally legal. So that's why you can get CBD now in all 50 states.
Hemp oil.
Right, derived from hemp. But hemp is not the same thing as marijuana. So marijuana is the flowers. So it doesn't legalize CBD that's derived from marijuana, and it also doesn't overrule state law. So in terms of your own relationship to CBD, THC, depending on where you live, if you're in the US, you have to go and Google that shit, because we can't answer that for you. But we can tell you.
Leafly.com.
Yeah, go check it out. But we can tell you our own experiences with CBD and THC, and why you might choose to get curious about exploration with either of these for yourself. Linda, thoughts?
Yeah, I guess for me, I started to be super curious because of first CBD, like healing properties, wellness, and then just my own experience with marijuana in general, but more of like the therapeutic benefits. And when I started learning about the endocannabinoid system and how there's real health going on in this conversation, and it's hard to access some of this information because there aren't all these clinical trials, and there is the legalization factor. I just started getting super curious. And one of the organizations that I like to follow is MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, and they do tremendous work and resource. And when I found them, I'm like, oh wow, there's just so much space for the therapeutic wellness benefits of marijuana and other different substances. Like, why has this been sort of demonized the whole time? And that was like when the curiosity bug really came a-barkin'. And then I also had major like period cramps, for lack of better, more specific science words. And I started experimenting with different mixtures to help me with my cramps. And I'm like, oh my goodness, this is amazing. And for me now, just finding these different ratios and blends that might feel good, and knowing whether edible or the flower or a vape pen, it's just so vast. There's so much. It's such an industry. So I'm always curious to see, especially when I'm traveling to California or to Colorado, what's out there. And when I was in cooking school, I learned how to cook with it, not in class, but we would do weekend science experiments. And that's been really fun and cool. And some of the cooking shows that you see online, and they might do the special green chef shows, you can make some really interesting experiences with food and cannabis.
Yeah. So we have openly used cannabis for, I've used it for ever, really, since I was 14. Like I said, not always in a healthy way, but it's always kind of been there off and on. My husband did not use or partake, obviously, for the entire duration of the time that he was in the military. So for like 13 years, and he used to actually get really annoyed at me because he'd be like, "Are you high right now?" And I'd be like, "No." And he'd be like, "Yes, you are." And he's like, "What did you do today? You were supposed to be working." Yeah, I was like doing other stuff, you guys, creative stuff, painting and writing. But so he didn't use it for a long time. And then my husband, if you guys don't know, was medically retired from the military because of severe back injury. He was, it was not an option. He was basically told, you got the boot. You can't be a tactical law enforcement officer anymore. And in his medical discharge, he was prescribed a significant amount of opiate painkillers. So if you guys have ever been prescribed opioid painkillers, or you've had a family member or loved one that's used them, they're extremely addictive and they have a lot of negative side effects. Not the least of which is like horrible constipation. And it's just really not a great life choice if you can avoid it to stay on opiates for a long period of time. So we chose to explore CBD and THC, having previously had good experience with my father-in-law who had colon cancer in using this for pain management, and just, choosing to use that at the end of the day or when the pain flares were really, really bad. It's like the healing and pain relief of CBD and THC, really, especially both of them together in the right mixture, is so powerful. And it's like such a great alternative. I just feel like I want everybody who's currently using opiates to make the switch and to try, because as someone who previously was like seriously abusing opiates, like they're so addictive, like you don't even want to have that in your house. And CBD specifically has been scientifically proven to help with epilepsy and seizure disorders, to actually reduce the instance of seizures, to obviously help with pain and inflammation. CBD specifically can be helpful for PTSD and anxiety. And of course, with all of these things, you guys talk to your doctors. We're not doctors. Surprise. But Crohn's disease, multiple sclerosis, and even opioid withdrawal, CBD has been shown through clinical and anecdotal evidence to be really beneficial and helpful for all of those things.
There's some recovery centers that will actually help facilitate the opioid withdrawal through cannabis usage and under supervision. And it's, tremendous in that transition.
Yeah. And there was this, this young girl named Charlotte a couple years ago. I don't know. There's a movie about her where she went from having 1,200 seizures a month to having about 3. And she was using, an ingestible oil from a high CBD strain of the plant. And it's like, if you imagine having like a little 3-year-old child who was having, 1,200 seizures a month, severe epileptic seizures that like were life-threatening, and you could give them an ingestible oil from a plant that had no negative side effects that would drop them down to about 3 seizures a month. Like, what the flip-flop are we doing if we're not making this fully available to people for healing? And one of the things that I think is, I'm going to get into my little, without putting too much of a political leaning on this, there was some proposed changes to controlled substances recently. And on that list was 4 or 5 like plant-based, like not arnica. What was on there? Not turmeric. It was something where you're like, are you kidding? It was like in that same category of arnica or turmeric or something that they're proposing, like banning, putting on the Schedule 1 or 2 list. And then there was like all of these synthetic substitutions that were like being approved through clinical trials. And I'm like, do we not see what's going on here? Like, to me, it's equivalent to like policing people capturing rainwater. And I don't know if you guys know that this is a thing, but in parts of California, it became illegal, a criminal act to collect rainwater in a barrel in your own backyard. That scares the crap out of me, right?
I got a barrel. I got my barrel.
Yeah, good. Well, I think, Florida, maybe you guys have more rain than we do, and it was like a drought thing. But the point is, like, there is a historical precedence of beneficial plants being controlled or made unavailable to the public, and then us being provided a synthetic alternative that is harmful to us, that is highly profitable for the pharmaceutical companies. If you don't know, now you know. So what about you? Why might you want to try THC or CBD? Can we talk about THC for a minute?
Yeah, and to answer your question, one is you're curious.
That's a great reason if you're curious. And I want to say also that if you're under the age of 18 and you're listening to this, none of this applies to you. You go listen to your parents and do your homework. The rest of you, if you've crossed that imaginary invisible threshold of the day that you were born on your 18th year, go get you some weed, man. Give it a shot. But yeah, curiosity is a great reason. I want to talk about the mild euphoria of CBD and THC, and just be really transparent here and say that I deal with pretty sometimes really crippling anxiety and like irritability that can border on rage, especially during the luteal phase of my cycle. And for me, 10 milligrams of THC and CBD, like a gummy or like some sort of ingestible edible, is like brings me back to a really happy baseline. Like, it takes me from like fighting with my husband, being angry about everything that's happening, having uncontrollable racing thoughts, back to a place where I'm like, everything is fine and I can breathe and I'm like, I'm good. So I use cannabis regularly, like especially at certain times of the month. One for those, severe, would have gotten to be much more severe PMS symptoms before my period. And then Linda, you mentioned cramps, and Linda actually gave me a lube, right? It was
Foria.
Foria lube. And you can put this on your menstrual cup or on a tampon if you're using tampons. Use it during your cycle, day 1 and day 2 of my cycle. You guys, I had cramps and back pain that made me want to die. Like, I'm talking like can't get out of bed. It would prevent me from going to school. It would prevent me from being able to work. And by using this as a suppository, like, they're completely gone.
Like immediately.
So if that doesn't convince you, then I'll take you to my third point, which is sex. Hello, sex. If you have not, and I'm not talking about getting like stoned out of your mind before you have sex, though, for experienced users, that might be cool too. I'm talking about even microdosing, especially if you have low libido, or if you have difficulty, reaching climax, or if you find that you're all in your head during sex instead of in your body. And I'm talking, more to the women, but also to the men, because I know my husband has good experience with this also. I will tell you that cannabis has had such a positive effect on our sex life, which was, by the way, already great to start with. And on those nights that we choose to make it a fun weed sex party, for lack of a better word. I mean, we're talking like so many orgasms and like so good for both of us. Like and this is because, if you're not familiar, one of the things that THC especially does is it heightens your sensations. So that's why listening to music is so cool when you're stoned. That's why eating food is like so awesome because yeah, all of your senses are expanded. So
you're like, I'm just doing an experiment. I think the next bite will taste as good as the last bite. I'm doing the experiment again. Now I'm trying it with something else. Now I'm trying it with something else.
Until everything in your kitchen is gone.
Can I say a side note about this food thing?
Yeah.
Okay. So for someone that had been in like a bulimia binge purge cycle and has very much healed and on the other side, I had trepidation around the whole munchie idea and like quote unquote weight gain. And I believe that it's possible. And I believe that when you experience the munchies, that you could be nourishing your body in exactly what it needs in that moment. And perhaps it's because I've chosen this belief system, but I eat ice cream.
Tell it to my husband when he ate the whole bag of kettle corn and like 2 Greek yogurt ice cream bars, 5 tangerines. In our house, we call it the hungry hamster, and it comes out at night sometimes.
Just needed those were just exactly the nutrients that he needed. I have this experience, and Brendan will say, "Oh, you had some food ketchup, huh?" And I'm like, exactly. I'm counting my macros, and I had some food ketchup.
You had to catch up.
I don't count my macros, but if I were, I would have met them.
So, so sex is great. Creativity. Now, I will say this. We're going to get to like when it's not good, but right now we're talking about when it's good. Okay. Yeah. So the right little blend of sativa, right? So there's different strains of marijuana plant. Sativa is generally thought of to be more energizing and more speeding up, whereas indicas are generally more calming and sleepy and slowing down. So sometimes if I have just a little bit of sativa, it makes me want to clean my whole house while listening to my favorite music and organize everything. And if anyone wants to shit talk that, too bad, because my house is messy and it needs to be cleaned. And it's like a great way to do it. Plus it's fun. Like I have fun. My old roommate and I used to have, we called them paint parties, and we would have our friends come over and everybody would bring their like a canvas or a piece of wood or something to paint on. And, some people might have a glass of wine. Some people might have my mom calls it a toke, might have a little toke of the marijuana, and we would create art and we would listen to music and we would stay in conversation. And like how cool that was. And in contrast to like a party that you might go to where the emphasis is all on alcohol or on binge drinking, and like the results that come out of that versus the result of going home with like a really lovely painting of some happy trees. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know, you decide what's a better way of being. And maybe it doesn't even have to be better. We don't have to put a value judgment on it. But I think like removing some of the stigma around like, labeling people stoner or like thinking that you're like a loafer or a loser if you use marijuana, versus saying like, this is something that induces an altered state of consciousness, just like caffeine, just like alcohol. And you can leverage that altered state of consciousness for the experience that you desire to have.
And there's a curiosity around the judgment, like where is that coming from, whether you are pro or negative. Was it pro or against? Asking about the judgment, because this is what's continuing these cycles of stigma. And unless you have a personal, like I was a judger and I had all these preconceived ideas. And then I'm like, oh, this is my personal decision, my personal relationship. And, when you're talking about 10 milligrams being for X, Y, or Z and you feeling great, for me, it's like 1 or 2 and that being my space. Right. And so
you just take like one little tooth nibble out of like a 10 milligram gummy. Like, what? Hey, that's tiny little.
Hey, don't be a jerk.
I'm sorry.
I have 3.5ers and I eat half.
Oh, wow.
And
so
it's
really, really microdose.
But I'm very sensitive, and I found that that's like a way more enjoyable space. And like if I have something like a 10 milligram, you know, that might be a fun and appropriate time for a different experience, which is like no responsibilities. Like that's for me past the point of creativity. You know, I'm flying, but it's just for me to know that relationship with my body, where I don't even think it's like a tolerance thing. I think it's more of a genetics thing. And 10 or 20, maybe even 30, I mean, now you're getting into like medical grade doses, might have a very similar effect.
I think it's probably both genetics and tolerance, because definitely I observe that if I am not, like for Lent last year, I gave up all substances for longer than Lent. And I ended up doing like 120 days, no alcohol, no cannabis, no nothing. And when I had the first, 10 milligram gummy after that, I was high as fuck, you guys. I'm just gonna call it, I was high as fuck. And that's not the case if I'm in a more consistent usage. So I think, especially if you're total noobs and you don't know any of what we're talking about, we're not advising you to go out and like purchase a large amount of marijuana and ingest it. By the way, like big fat freaking disclaimer, we are not telling you to do anything. Like you're an adult, you make your own decisions. And let's go ahead and give our warning on, especially on edibles. People say, oh, nobody's ever overdosed with weed. Maybe that's true, but let me tell you what can happen. Okay. My old roommate, not going to name names, bless her sweet little heart. She had homemade butter, right? Weed butter that she had made or someone had given her. And she decided to make a box of Kraft macaroni and cheese using the denoted amount of butter that Kraft suggests, which by the way, you guys, it's like 4 tablespoons. Okay. That's half of a stick of butter. That's disgusting. But so she made it not thinking she used all weed butter. Now she was intending to use the weed butter, but she didn't think maybe I should do 3 tablespoons of normal butter and like 1 tablespoon of weed butter. And it's especially difficult to measure dosage if something is like homemade. So my sweet friend, she really likes macaroni and cheese, so she ate the whole box. So she made it with the 4 tablespoons of weed butter and she ate the whole box. This was when Brent was still in the Coast Guard, and it was our roommate we were sharing a house with. And so he came home from work later that day, and she had been on the couch asleep for like, I don't know, 4 hours or something. And he's like, what's up with roommate? I almost said her name. I don't want to throw her under the bus like that. And I was like, oh, she's just like sleeping. I don't know. So we went to bed that night. We woke up in the next morning, she's still sleeping on the couch. And we're like, this is really weird. And so we go and try to wake her up, and she's like not actually comatose, but like she was like very, very asleep, like not basically like non-responsive. So my husband obviously was a first responder. So he's like taking her pulse. He's like, she's okay. Her heart rate's fine. Her pulse is fine. Her respiration's fine. He's like, what's wrong with her? And I'm like, I don't freaking know, man, and little detective work, like checked the sink or the dishwasher, the trash, and then the freezer, and figured out like, I think she made macaroni and cheese with weed butter. And so we're like, oh my gosh, well, could she overdose? Long story short, she slept for 48 hours.
Oh my God.
Straight without waking up. I think maybe she woke up to go to the bathroom, but I don't even think she did. And when she finally came out of it, she says that she was like, that she's never really been the same, that she was like a little bit like, she like definitely permanently altered her brain a little bit from that experience. And she also said that it was absolutely terrifying because she was conscious, but she couldn't actually move. Like the body high was so intense that she couldn't move. And so that's a very extreme situation, but like, this, also happened the first time my husband and I took edibles again after he hadn't used cannabis for 13 or 14 years. We bought a brownie, like one that you can buy from the dispensary. And like, you guys, those are really strong. Okay. So we cut it into the correct dosage, which was like, I don't know how many milligrams per dose. We cut it into the correct size squares, and we each ate half of one of those squares. And then we waited like an hour and a half, whatever it says. And we were like, this isn't working. Like there's like, neither of us felt anything. So we're like, okay, we'll eat the other half. As we're chewing and like swallowing, the first half hits, and it was just like douche, like a just like whole body, like completely like laid out. We were living on our sailboat at the time, and we were both just like, oh my God, are we gonna be okay? Like we just ate another half of this. And then we proceeded to watch Natural Born Killers, which is a Quentin Tarantino film. I don't know if any of you have seen it, but if you have, you're gonna be like, what's wrong with you? Why did you do that? Because we were like so stoned, and then watching this movie that's like, first of all, like the weirdest, most trippy movie you've ever seen anyway. And like every like 5 minutes, one of us would be like, are you okay? And then the other one would be like, it's okay. Like, we're just stoned, and like this movie is art, you know, because we were like getting ourselves like a little bit of like trauma, like watch like so stoned watching this movie. So you can definitely overdo it, is what I'm saying.
And always, I think, make sure that if you're sharing with another person, that they understand what they're getting themselves into. No like sneaky, I think that's like an easy joke, like, oh, I'm just gonna sneak it into my mom's coffee.
Don't do that.
Don't do that. And if you're new, starting like very, very, very minimal, like so minimal, like my
setting your environment too. Like if you're going to try this for the first time, or you want the intention of using it to enhance your sex life, or to, you know, to try painting, or, you know, just be at home, be somewhere safe. Don't plan on driving. Don't plan on having any important conversations, or like maybe even put your phone on airplane mode. Like create a sacred space and give yourself that time to have the experience. Just like if you were, you know, if you were going to drink, like don't drink and drive. And also know that like, it may not feel like a party for you. Like everybody's going to respond differently. It doesn't need to feel like a party. Yeah.
That's interesting. There's so many different ways to have the experience. Every different strain may have different, you know, characteristics for that experience. A loved one of mine recently was in the hospital for what was thought to be a heart issue, was later found out to be an anxiety attack from a experience with cannabis that was an anxiety inducing one. Mm-hmm. So, you know, the sativa can tend to be a little bit more, can be an overgeneralization, but can often be a little bit more anxiety of a zinger.
It will definitely be more likely to induce paranoia and anxiety, for sure.
And the indica, more of a relaxing, sleepy before bed. So there's a lot of available education if you want to dabble. And really the reason we brought this to our listeners is to explore if they're feeling called to, the wellness aspects of it. And for myself, a great 18-to-1 ratio, amazing for anxiety and just overall well-being. Foria for the old period cramps. Those are my two go-tos, and the old 3.5 milligrammer for party time.
Yeah, and I use a hemp-derived CBD, 1,500 milligrams that I use like, well, it's a 1,500 milligram bottle. It's 50 milligrams per dose. And I use that pretty much every day. There's zero psychoactive effect. You don't feel anything from it. You can get it in any state. And it does, I definitely notice that on the days that I use it versus the days that I don't, that my emotions and mental state are just more even keel. So I have less of those racing thoughts and anxiety. And then, like I said, a low dose, whatever that is for you, and figuring that out for enhancing sex is for me like amazing. And if you're, you know, I would definitely clear it with your partner first, or if you're at solo sex, then like have at it. But
Foria is also a lube beyond just for the period pain.
Oh yeah, I'm gonna try that later today.
Old clitoral stimulus.
And then also, this isn't for everyone, but I have found that when I have really intentionally gone into nature, gone camping or gone on a hike and had like a micro dose or a really low dose, and then just gone to spend time in communion with nature, that there can even be like a spiritual experience that happens through the slight sensory awareness and expansion, a deeper connection that I feel with the earth and with the different elements, and have felt really, really connected and had some of my most profound spiritual realizations during that time, which, that's maybe not for everyone, but for me, it's been pretty cool.
I like it.
Yeah. So, weed, man. Do we have a book? Or take us to the book club?
This week's book club is High Times Cannabis Cookbook. During my stint at cooking school, I bought this for fun to try new recipes. And if you're in a state where you can get recreational flower and want to try some cooking, I highly recommend this being your guide. I actually have a note here: THC, 600 milligrams, 1 gram. And I was making vegan cannabis carrot cake.
Ooh, that sounds good.
An ode to my mama.
What was your carrot cake? Did you give that to your mom?
No.
Oh, we can't. Lynn Tate, we love you. What's your favorite recipe from that book? Or what's one that you're curious to try next?
To try next, I would say, I've done a lot of dessert cooking, but I want to try more, what is it? Like just regular food, So making something like a
bruschetta.
Yeah, mac and cheese, getting a little bit away from the sweets and getting more into, I did this one actually. It was a roasted ganja garlic cannellini dip. And some of these recipes are really yummy outside of just making this.
You don't have to put weed in it. You could just make them. Yeah.
Stuffed stoned jalapeno poppers. To be honest, it's a little cheesy. I'm sure there's more refined cookbooks here, but yeah, they have a kind.
I don't know. My mom got me one called the Vegan Stoner Cookbook. And it was like literally recipes that you could make in 5 minutes or less if you're like really stoned, so you can't figure out how to make something hard. So it was just like recipes, like get like a Kaiser roll and like pour spaghetti sauce on it and put mozzarella cheese on it and microwave it. I'm like, this is a terrible cookbook.
This is making me laugh. This recipe, this is my dad. He loves hot dogs so much. I can't even handle this. Little Snoop hot doggy dogs.
Oh my God. Are they like little mini hot dogs?
No, it's just a picture of Snoop Dogg smoking a big old blunt.
Oh, that sounds fun. So we hope that this has been enlightening and has helped you raise your vibration or awareness around cannabis. You guys, we really want your comments on this one. We want to know, have you ever tried it? Are you cannabis curious? Are you like never going to listen to the show again because you are straight edge and now you're like, oh my God, these girls are druggies? Either way, we love you. We want to hear your takeaways. So please leave us a comment. If you like it, subscribe. And if
you have any recipes, send them to our DM.
For sure. And if you are looking to be our next sponsor for our next Rise to Thrive event,
what up, Reese?
Let us know. But for real, we love you guys. If you enjoyed the show, subscribe, share it with a friend, tag us on stories. We love seeing you guys enjoying this experience with us. And it is always our mission to serve you up with these gems weekly so that you can thrive daily. Stay high and stay fly.
Mic drop.
See you on the flip side. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with us today on another episode of Rise to Thrive podcast. We are so stoked that you're here.
If you loved today's episode, if it helped you, please share it with a friend, snap a screenshot, tag us on stories at Rise to Thrive Podcast, or head to iTunes or Spotify and leave us an honest review. We love you guys. We appreciate you. And until next time, keep rising, keep thriving. See you next time.